Wyoming Territory, July 1883. The wind kicked up dust along the old cattle trail outside Rawlins as the sun scorched the high plains and Zadie Harper ran. Her wedding dress snagged on sagebrush, the hem torn and brown with dirt. Her veil had long since blown off behind her. She did not stop to look back. Her groom had not shown. The preacher had stood silent. The guests had whispered. Her father had turned red with shame. And then Zadie had turned and walked run out of the church and kept running until the town was behind her. She had not seen the saddle. She tripped hard over it, pitched forward onto the packed earth, and cried out as her hands scraped the gravel. "Whoa, careful!" She looked up, breath catching. A tall man crouched beside her, reaching out. His hat shadowed his face, but the concern in his voice was clear. His hand was rough, calloused, and steady as he helped her to her feet. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Zadie blinked up at him. Her hair clung to her forehead, her chest heaved, and her heart hammered so loud she thought it might burst. "No," she said, though her knees ached and her pride was bruised. I was not watching where I was going." He glanced at the saddle she had fallen over. Clearly, his mouth twitched just a little. Not quite a smile. Not unkind. "That yours?" "No," she said. "I do not ride." The man stood fully now, tall and lean, his tan shirt dusted from trail work. His horse stood nearby, tied to a post. A rifle was holstered on the saddle. "I was just setting up camp," he said. "I was not expecting to find a bride tearing across the prairie." "I was not expecting to be one," she said, her voice catching. He paused, then nodded like that explained everything. He looked away and then back at her. "You all right?" he asked again. She shook her head once, and a tear slid down her cheek before she could stop it. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's get you some water." She hesitated, but his voice was gentle. "Sure." She followed him the few steps to his small camp where a pot of beans warmed over a low fire. He poured water from his canteen into a tin cup and handed it to her. She drank. He sat across from her but gave her space, arms resting on his knees. "Name's Thayer Ellison," he said. "Zadie Harper." He nodded as if the name meant something now that she had spoken it aloud. The silence stretched, but it was not uncomfortable. The wind stirred his shirt collar. Her heart slowed. Did he change his mind? Thayer asked after a while. She looked down. "He left town last night. My father said he got on a train east." "No note." "Nothing." Thayer's jaw tightened. "Coward." Zadie looked up. "You do not even know him." "Do not need to." He met her eyes. "Any man who leaves a woman like you at the altar is not worth the dirt on his boots." She stared at him, surprised. He did not look away. She set the cup down slowly. "I cannot go back." "Then do not." She blinked. "I have nowhere." "You do now," he said. She studied him. "Why?" Thayer stood and offered his hand again. "Because you tripped over my saddle and I picked you up. I am not letting go of your hand now." Zadie stared at him. Her heart thudded again, but not from panic this time. She put her hand in his. He held it firm. That night, she sat across the fire from him, wearing a borrowed shirt and trousers he had dug out of his pack. He had turned his back politely while she changed, and when she came out, he looked at her like she was not ridiculous at all. "Where were you headed?" she asked. "South. Toward Medicine Bow. Got some work lined up on a ranch near there." "And now?" He looked into the fire. "Not going without you." She exhaled, shaky. "You just met me." "I know. You do not know what I am like." He looked over at her, eyes steady. "I know what I saw. You kept running when the whole town was watching. That takes grit." Zadie laughed, short and soft. "It takes shame." He shook his head. "No. It takes a kind of strength most folks do not have." She looked back at him, and the firelight flickered across his face. "You do not have to fix me," she whispered. "I am not trying to," he said. "I just want to walk beside you." Zadie looked down at her hands, scraped and bruised. Then she looked back at him. "I do not want to be alone," she said. You are not, he answered. He moved around the fire, slow, careful, sat beside her. He took her hand again. She let him. They sat together like that until the stars came out, and the wind settled. And he never let go. The sky had turned pale blue by the time Thayer saddled his horse the next morning, careful not to jostle the pan tied behind the cantle. Zadie stood nearby, braiding her hair with slow fingers, her borrowed shirt tucked neatly into trousers rolled at the ankle. She didn't speak until the last of the gear was packed. Do they know you're coming early? She asked. The foreman sent word last week. Wasn't a firm start, just said soon as I could get there. Thayer glanced over. You all right riding double? I've never done it, she said. But I won't fall. He gave a quiet nod. I'll take the reins. You just hold on. When she mounted behind him, her hands settled lightly at his waist. He waited a moment before nudging the horse forward, letting the movement settle between them. The trail south ran flat for a while before dipping toward the lower hills. They rode in silence, the wind brushing past with the scent of pine and sun-warmed earth. Around mid-morning, she spoke again, voice low near his shoulder. What's the name of the ranch? Bar H belongs to a man called Emery Bell. Used to trail cattle from Texas up through Wyoming before he put down posts. Are you a drover? Was. Still know how to move a herd, but I've done plenty else. Fixed fences, built wells, broke colts. She was quiet a moment. I stitched shirts, once. For the mercantile back home. Good work like that's always needed. I hated it. He glanced back, but she only looked out past his shoulder, expression unreadable. I didn't like the counting. The same seams over and over. Felt like I was disappearing. Then we'll find you something else. She looked down at his back. You talk like I'm staying. You haven't said you're not. She didn't answer, but she didn't let go either. By noon, the trail narrowed, climbing slightly into the edge of pine country. Thayer slowed the horse near a creek and swung down, offering her a hand to dismount. She took it, her grip steady now. They ate jerky and cold biscuits beneath the shade of a fir. Zadie picked at her food, gaze fixed on the water tumbling over stone. I used to think I'd go to Denver one day, she said. See a theater. Maybe learn piano. You still can. She gave a faint shake of her head. Not in these boots. He leaned back against a rock, hat tipped low. You don't strike me as someone who gives up on things. She looked at him, eyes narrowed slightly. You don't know what I've given up. He met her gaze. Then tell me. The wind stirred the grass. She didn't speak for several breaths. My mother died when I was 12. I raised my sister after that. My father took to drink. Said I owed him for the roof over our heads. When he arranged the match, I didn't argue. She paused. I thought maybe I could start over. You still can, he said again, quieter now. She stood then, brushing crumbs from her trousers. I don't expect you to carry the weight of my choices. I'm not carrying anything you haven't already dragged through yourself. She looked down at him, one hand on her hip. You always talk like that? He smiled with only one corner of his mouth. Only when I mean it. She turned away, but her shoulders had eased slightly. They rode on through the afternoon, passing old cattle paths and juniper stands. As the sky began to shift toward orange, Thayer pointed toward a low ridge. Other side of that's where the Bar H starts. We can camp early. No sense showing up covered in dust. She nodded. I'd like that. They made camp near a stand of cottonwoods, the leaves whispering above them. Thayer dug out a small tin of coffee and set it boiling while Zadie gathered kindling. When she returned, he handed her a tin cup without looking up. You always this quiet? She asked. Only when I'm listening. She sat beside him. And what do you hear? He glanced at her then. A woman finding her feet. She didn't answer, but her hand brushed his on the cup's edge. She didn't pull away. When the fire burned low, she lay on her side near the warmth, wrapped in a blanket he had handed her without a word. He settled a few feet away, one eye on the horse, the other on the stars. Before sleep pulled her under, she whispered, You don't know me yet. He answered without opening his eyes. I will. And the night held still around them. The Bar H ranch spread low across the valley, its fences stretching like stitched seams over the land, weather gray and solid. Zadie stood beside the gate, fingers curled around the top rail, watching the movement beyond, men on horseback, dogs trailing, a woman tossing grain to chickens near a lean-to. The house itself was 2 stories, wide-porched, its red paint faded to rust. Thayer waited beside her, his hat tipped back as he studied the yard. "Belle's wife runs most of it," he said. "Name's Ruth. Keeps the books, checks the ledgers herself." Zadie didn't look at him. "You've worked here before?" He shook his head. "But I know the kind of place where women aren't just decoration." Ruth came down the steps before anyone else did, wiping her hands on a cloth tucked into her waistband. She was maybe in her 40s, tall as most men, with 2 long braids shot through with white. When she reached them, her eyes passed over Zadie once, then settled on Thayer. "You're early," she said. "Got here as soon as I could," he answered. "This is Zadie." Ruth's gaze returned to her, more curious than cautious. "You looking for work too?" Zadie felt the question settle heavy in her chest. "I'd like to earn my keep." "If there's room." Ruth nodded once. "There's always something needs doing. Come in. You can wash up and eat before we talk more." Inside, the house smelled of coffee and pine soap. Zadie followed Ruth into a room with a long table and a hearth low with ash. A younger girl, maybe 15, brought bread and salt pork without being asked, then left without a word. Ruth poured water into a basin and set it near the door. "Use that first," she said, then looked at Zadie's hands. "You ride through rough country?" "No," Zadie said. "I ran through it." Ruth said nothing, but her mouth tightened slightly. Then she turned, and Zadie watched in silence. Later, Thayer was sent to the barn to help with a wagon axle, and Ruth led Zadie to the henhouse. They walked in silence until Ruth spoke. "Men come here on their own sometimes, looking for a fresh start. Some of them bring trouble." Zadie kept her eyes on the path. "Thayer isn't one of those." "You sure?" "Yes." Ruth stopped beside the coupe. "You always speak like that?" Zadie looked at her. "Like what?" "Like you've already had to explain yourself too many times." Zadie didn't answer right away. Then she bent to lift a basket of eggs. "I don't expect to be believed just because I say something." Ruth studied her face a moment longer, then opened the coupe door. "Good." They worked until the sun crept low. Zadie gathered eggs, swept feed, and kept her back straight even when her fingers cramped. Ruth said little, but once when Zadie scrubbed out a water dish with her sleeve rolled high, she nodded once, as if confirming something she'd already suspected. By the time the bell rang for supper, the air had cooled and the shadows had turned long. Zadie climbed the porch steps with her arms sore and her hair damp at the nape. Inside, the table was full ranch hands, Ruth's daughter, even Emery himself, a broad man with a limp and a voice like gravel. Thayer sat across from her, lifting his eyes as she approached. "How was it?" Zadie didn't sit yet. "I wrangled feed and scrubbed troughs." He grinned. "Sounds like you earned your seat." She sat slowly, glancing at the others. "I didn't say I liked it." "No," he said. "But you didn't quit either." She looked at him, and something shifted in her chest, small but steady. After the meal, Thayer walked her out to the side of the house, where a bench sat beneath a cottonwood. The sky above was bruised with dusk, clouds gathering in the east. "You planning to stay long?" he asked. Zadie didn't answer right away. "I haven't decided." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I meant what I said. I'm not going anywhere you're not." She watched the wind move through the grass. "I don't know how to be part of something that isn't falling apart." He turned to her. "Then we'll build something that holds." She looked at him. "Why?" His answer came quiet and sure. "Because every time you look at me, I want to be better than I was the time before." Zadie's breath caught, but she didn't look away. Instead, she reached out, brushing her fingers against the back of his hand. He turned his hand, wrapped hers in his, and held it there firm, warm, and without question. And for the first time since she'd left the church behind, she felt something in her begin to root. Rain came just after midnight, steady and cold. It tapped soft against the bunkhouse roof where Thayer slept, and heavier on the loft window where Zadie lay in a narrow bed Ruth had made up with an extra quilt. Morning brought low clouds and the smell of wet earth. The kind of day that kept folks inside mending tack or repairing tools too splintered for field work. Thayer found her in the barn, sleeves rolled to the elbow, sorting rope by thickness along one of the back benches. She didn't look up until he spoke. "Ruth says you've got a sharp eye for knots." Zadie tied off the coil in her hands. "She showed me the Honda loop. I didn't know it could hold like that." "Well, spun rope listens better than most people," he said. "It'll tell you when it's close to giving." She stepped back, brushed straw from her skirt. "What about people? How do you tell when they're close to giving?" "You don't," he said. "You stay close. You pay attention. And when it happens, you don't let go." Her gaze met his, guarded but steady. "That sounds like something you learned the hard way." "I did," he said. "I let someone down once. My younger brother. He took a fall off a colt we weren't supposed to be riding. I left him to limp home alone and our father beat him for it. I never forgave myself for not walking beside him." Zadie didn't answer right away. Then she reached for another coil, but her hands stilled before she touched it. "You're not the only one with things that won't rest," she said. "There were mornings I'd wake early just to be alone, but my sister would already be there, waiting. She never said it, but I think she knew I wanted to run." He moved closer, slow. The barn was quiet but for the wind at the eaves. "What kept you from it?" he asked. "She needed me more than I needed to leave." "And now?" Zadie looked up at him. "Now I don't want to run. But I don't know how to stay either." "You don't have to know yet," he said. "You just have to stop looking at the door." Something in her face eased, not quite soft, but less guarded. She turned slightly, brushed a finger along the wood grain of the stall. "I used to think I had to earn every kindness," she said. "That nothing given came without cost. Then let's make a life where kindness runs even," he said. "No debts between us." She turned to face him fully. "That's not the world I knew. It's the one we'll make." Rain started again, light this time, and they stood there with only the smell of horse and cedar between them. Then Zadie stepped forward, slow and sure, and laid her hand over his chest, just above his heart. "I'm tired of bracing for what comes next," she said. He covered her hand with his. "Then don't. Let's build something steady, one piece at a time." She didn't speak again, but her fingers curled slightly against his shirt. He leaned in, not fast or hungry, just close enough for her to feel his breath. Outside, the rain deepened, but inside the barn, it was warm and steady and still. The last frost broke early that year. By the first week of April, the snowmelt ran fast through the gullies, and calves dropped in the lower pasture with steam rising off their backs in the morning light. Zadie stood on the porch with a basket of washed linens, watching Thayer ride in from the west fence line, his shoulders loose in the saddle, coat tied behind him like a banner. She didn't call out. She didn't need to. He caught sight of her from across the yard, raised a hand once, and turned his horse toward the barn without breaking pace. Inside, Ruth was counting seed packets at the kitchen table, her ledger open beside her. She didn't look up when she spoke. "You've taken to this place." Zadie set the basket down near the stove. "It's the first place that's let me be useful without being used." Ruth reached for her pencil. "We need more women like you, not fewer. I didn't think I'd want to stay when I first got here." "I know. That's why I didn't ask." Zadie sat down across from her. "Do you think it's foolish to build a life out of what's left instead of what should have been? You think I married Emery because it was tidy?" Ruth glanced up. "He came home from war with a leg that wouldn't hold and a temper that took years to settle. But he loved my steadiness, and I learned to trust his word. That's what lasts. Not the start, but what you build after the dust settles." Zadie ran her thumb along the edge of the table. "He asked me this morning if I'd stay with him. Not just here, with him." "And what did you say?" "I told him I didn't want to answer until I knew whether I could be of use here, apart from him." Ruth's eyes softened. "And now?" Zadie stood, voice even. "Now I know." Outside, Thayer had stripped off his gloves and leaned against the paddock fence, watching a pair of colts nose each other warily. His face was flushed from wind, his shirt damp at the collar, and his hat hung loose in one hand. Zadie walked to him without hesitation. "You always this quiet after a ride?" He glanced sideways. "Just thinking about whether you'll still be here tomorrow morning." She stepped closer. "I will." His breath caught. "You sure?" "I've made peace with what I've lost. I'm ready to build something that won't fall apart if the wind shifts." Thayer let the hat drop to the ground. "I've never asked a woman anything worth hearing until I met you." "Then ask." He reached for her hand, the one she always kept bare of rings or ribbon. "Will you marry me, Zadie Harper?" Her eyes didn't waver. "Yes." He pulled her in, slow but certain, and kissed her like they had all the time in the world. They married beneath the cottonwood by the main house 2 weeks later. Ruth hemmed Zadie's new dress in the evenings after supper, and Thayer carved 2 matching bands from a piece of oak he'd kept from a fence post he'd repaired their first week on the ranch. Emery stood behind them with his hands clasped, and Ruth spoke the vows in a voice that held stillness and weight. Afterward, the hands clapped their backs and passed around a jug of peach brandy someone had tucked away for a good day. Zadie danced once with Thayer, then again with Ruth's daughter, who'd taken to shadowing her in the henhouse each morning, asking questions Zadie no longer minded answering. That night, when the house was quiet and the fire burned low, Zadie sat on the edge of the bed they now shared, brushing her hair out with slow strokes. Thayer stood nearby, unlacing his boots one at a time. "You're not afraid anymore," he said. "I'm still cautious," she replied, "but I'm not waiting for the ground to give way." He set the boots aside. "This life, it won't always be gentle." "I don't want gentle," she said. "I want honest. And I want you." He crossed the room, knelt before her, and rested his head against her knees. She ran her fingers through his hair, slow and sure. They lay that night without hurry, the wind outside soft and steady, their breathing matched. When dawn came, it found them tangled together, warm and still. Years passed. Zadie took over the ledgers from Ruth when her eyes began to fade, and she kept them clean and precise. She never stitched shirts again, but taught the younger girls in the valley how to sew strong seams for themselves and their kin. She planted apricot trees along the south fence line, and every spring they bloomed in pale defiance of the wind. Thayer never left the Bar H. He trained horses now, younger ones brought in by neighboring ranchers, and he taught the boys to ride with quiet hands and patience. He still rose before the sun, and Zadie often found him sitting at the edge of the porch with coffee in hand, watching the light come up over the ridge. When they lost their first child in the early months of a hard winter, they bore it together without blame, without silence. Thayer carved a small marker from pine. Zadie planted wildflowers along the fence line nearby. And in time, they healed. Their second child came in late August, a girl with Thayer's quiet eyes and Zadie's way of holding herself that made others take notice. They named her Ruth, and when the elder Ruth passed, the girl carried her namesake with the same steady shoulders. They lived long and well. And through each season, harvest, hard frost, thaw, and bloom, they held to each other with the kind of love that asked nothing but gave everything. Because some lives are not built from what's planned. They're shaped by what's endured, and who we choose to share the weight with. And Zadie chose Thayer. Every day after that, she chose him again.